The first item is the approval of the minutes from the October 25th meeting. What are your wishes? They were in the packet.
I'll make a first motion to approve.
Moved by Will, seconded by Pat.
And I would say there's, on the second page, there's a word impetuous that was meant to be impetus. So 2 letters need to be excised.
With that, there was a second with that change. Is that
Yes, sir.
acceptable to the
Yes, sir.
mover? Will,
I'll accept that change.
any discussion? If not, all those in favor of approval of the minutes with that technical change will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. That motion carries. Discussion and possible action on the review task force objectives to determine if there are any data gaps, findings, and/or recommendations. And I'm going to try to lay out the agenda for tonight. The item 4, discussion update on the citizens' engagement findings, is delayed due to Eric having an illness, and so he promised to get it to us by Thanksgiving, but we don't have it for tonight's meeting, so we'll wait for those that report on the findings. And then we'd like to get into, going back to our original tasks, how are we doing? Are there any areas that you see gaps in a lot of tonight's meeting is going to be on what our recommendations will be going forward. So we amended the packet to put in the tasks. I don't know if you all have access to computers. If the updated task or the task and objective list is in the packet, if it doesn't pull up right away, you might need to
Was
refresh.
that added today?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
We thought it would be
It
just
should
help.
now be 2 pages.
So maybe we'll just quick run through those items, and if you think that we've done it, I think we're at that critical point. I know Ben wants us to be over and be done. I think a lot of us have other things we'd like to move on to. So assess and analyze the Wausau's current policing policies and practices, including the implications, the policies, and the practices here in the city, practices have on the city, its residents, and its resources. I think we've gotten a very thorough evaluation of what their current practices are in terms of recruitment, training, evaluation on an ongoing basis, how they track use of force. We've been presented with information relative to when force has been used. There have been relatively few deadly use of force incidents in the history of the city. And I believe that we've accomplished that goal. Does anybody think we have not? Or think that there are any gaps? Michael?
I'll just say that from my recollection, when we went through all the policies, I was impressed upon the fact that the Wausau Police Department had already taken initiative to update their policies with contemporary issues, findings from the President's Task Force report. So I was, very impressed and satisfied from the review of all the policies. We've had access to all of them. Any questions we had, we've gone through thoroughly. I feel like we've actually crossed that one off pretty well. So thank you for the good work on that.
Anybody else have anything to add? All right. Second one is investigate underlying social needs, including mental health problems. I think we spent time talking about the homeless. We've talked about crisis teams and some of the issues, and we've started discussing recommendations. Are there other issues that you think we need to look at? And again, this may be a little painful, but I think in light of the fact that we've been specifically tasked with these things, I want to make sure that we've got consensus moving forward. All right. Identify underlying social needs, including mental health problems, homelessness, and trauma that may bring people into contact with law enforcement. Again, I think we've done that. Any thoughts, any data gaps, any needs? Analyze the Police and Fire Commission's officers' screening, selection, hiring, and disciplinary processes and develop recommendations together with the Police and Fire Commission. While we haven't met with the Police and Fire Commission, we've been presented information relative to their hiring practices and others. Are there any data gaps or needs in this area?
I'd be happy to hear from any of the other task force members on that, but as the outgoing or the past chair of the PFC, and I know Will's the current chair of the PFC, we went through the entire manual in the last year and reviewed all of the hiring practices, and I think we've done a really good job of doing that, but certainly we could entertain any other further discussion if anybody has any interest, but I feel really, really well positioned there.
Any thoughts? Any thoughts? If not, we'll move on to 5. Examine systemic racism and weigh the impact on service delivery, including policing in the city of Wausau. I'm going to ask that we hold that one pending the receipt of the final report from those focus groups. I think some of that information may be critical to our ongoing discussions on that area, particularly given the nature of some of those groups. So if there's consensus, we can hold that until we get that final report from Eric. Suggest additional research data and analysis to be undertaken in order to reach the task force and community goals. I think we've been asking you for data gaps and other things throughout. I think we're good there. Evaluate the role of citizen oversight, including but not limited to the Wausau Police and Fire Commission in Wausau's policing practices. We haven't talked about that a lot at the task force level. I think what we have talked about is doing the survey or requesting that the survey to be done on a regular basis going forward. Do we want to make that a formal recommendation, or are there other items that you would like to see in this category?
I think we should make it a formal recommendation because it is sort of, as we mentioned, our baseline for moving forward to see, what areas, whether we are improving, whether we need improvement moving forward in terms of our, how our citizens view the department. So I think it's good in our ability then to look back and see where we started from and then moving forward.
Other thoughts?
Pat?
Yeah, I'm not clear on Will's point, but it does seem to me that I don't recall us spending much time on that topic, and I think it might be good to review the opportunities that the citizens do have in our community for such oversight and talk about whether that's sufficient.
All right, we'll put that aside and come back to it. I guess maybe a question, Pat, would be, is that a question of, you have the Police and Fire Commission with its formal role under the state statutes. You have the Public Health and Safety Committee, or the Health and Public Safety Committee. We haven't talked about what their roles are. Would that be something that you would like to see us talk about at an upcoming meeting? And what other opportunities there are?
Yes, and then outside of those committees as well, for citizens who are just concerned, Joe Smith down the street, I think we could, I was going to say 10 or 15 minutes, but 15 or 20 maybe, with the chief describing function of the PFC and public health and safety, and then opportunity for citizen complaints and how those are pursued.
I agree with that idea. I think that even though we have members representing the PFC here, I think it needs to be brought up in front of the task force so that we can share in our reports and recommendations, the conversations, and be able to, if we need to incorporate anything, to have that background.
All right.
And I guess I'd want to understand what kind of additional oversight could even be possible. I mean, when you talk about PFC, the statutory authorities of the PFC are personnel related. They really don't oversee the management and operations of the police and fire departments. That's the prerogative of the city council and the public safety department. So, when we're talking oversight, are we talking transparency? This morning at the PFC, I know we get quarterly reports from the police department. They're 20-some pages that outline all their activities, all their complaints. It's an excellent document. I know the public health and safety. So if we're going to come back and look at that, I'd be interested in, maybe within the context of the President's Task Force report or the state legislations, what are we talking about with additional oversight that would be outside of those two arenas that may be missing and be very specific?
Okay. Let me lay out sort of the scenario that we were looking at. I think we're trying to be done by February 1st with our report. And if you have your calendars handy, maybe we'll lay out our next couple of meetings and then the wrap-up session. Are people around, Will, I know you travel, but on December 20th? Would December 20th? It would be at 7 p.m.
I have a child's band concert that I probably will need to prioritize over you all. My apologies, but I will end my relationship at some level with you all, but she'll still be around.
So
I've got medical stuff, heavy duty that week, so I'm out.
that whole week?
Yeah, and a little beyond.
It's a quick, how would the 16th be? It's a Thursday night. Looking at the room.
6:30 would be fine.
Kitty?
If she says it's fine here, I'm good. Yeah.
So let's look at the 16th. Then my thoughts are is we would have a meeting in mid-January, and then our final meeting at the end of January and wrap it up. If that makes sense. And the reason I want to get the date set is that I want to start putting some of the topics that we've raised today on an agenda for a future meeting. So I would ask if we've agreed on the 16th, Ben, would you be in a position on the 16th to be able to give us an overview of the Police and Fire Commission and either you or the mayor and the role of the Public Safety Committee? And so we would schedule that for that date. And then we would have Eric's report as well. I think that's foundational for some of our discussions, getting that focus group report. So I think that may drive where we go with some of the future.
Not to add to the role of the Public Safety Committee and the PFC, but I think there's also maybe some opportunity to talk about mayoral oversight, because there is some of that
Okay.
too. Not to be self-serving.
John, I'm not going to be able to, the 16th, that whole, like the last 20 days of December, I'm out of it. But I think you guys need to move ahead.
So if you're comfortable with us moving ahead, then we will move ahead and we will be thinking about you. So I think also, we talked about the neighbor to neighbor, but that really is a citizen engagement program. So I think if we could highlight that as well. I think we talked about that briefly, but, so we would talk about Police and Fire Commission, the role of the mayor, the role of the council, and then how we're engaging citizens currently through neighbor to neighbor.
Do you want the complaints, how those are pursued?
Yes, in the complaint process. And then I would also ask that we, dedicate a portion of that meeting to Eric's, the focus group discussion, sort of that compilation of that citizen input to make, and then see if any issues arise out of that discussion that would be material to other things. We're going to go on the 16th.
The silence layer, so.
Please, so your daughters can't call you.
Daughters will always call.
So, Mike, I feel the family connection.
So I just have a quick question. I just want to make sure I clear understanding. So, and I guess what I was talking about earlier, are we saying that as part of the oversight process that we would include sort of a revisit in terms of, maybe, every year, sort of send out surveys in terms of what, how people feel in terms about, the policies or what's going on in terms of the police department? Is that, I thought that was something we had talked about. So is
We'll
that,
put that we'll put that in that whole, lump it together in there, but we'll bring that in as a recommendation and try to frame it.
okay, all right, thank you.
And then can we look at now into January? How would the 10th of January be at 6:30? I'm seeing thumbs up, nods. Pat, you're going to be Pat's crossing his fingers. And then finally, how would January 31st be? And that would be the goal of the wrap-up session. Thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. All right, I think we're going to target those 3 dates. So at the next meeting, we'll focus a little bit on that citizen engagement. We'll get the report back from Eric. We'll continue to work through this list tonight to see if there are other issues. And then use those meetings to refine our recommendations and other actions. Number 8, participate in community engagement activities and dialogue about policing, human service needs, and systemic racism. I think we have done that through listening sessions, surveys, and focus groups. Have we met that? I think we've met that requirement. Conduct a public hearing on proposed recommendations. That would happen at the end of the process. So I think we'll have to work with the mayor. I think we would want to present this. The question is, do we present our preliminary recommendations to the council and then take it up for hearing, or do we present them to the community and then take it after that hearing to the council? I'm looking to you, Katie, for guidance. You and Pat, what is your preference?
I would wait until you had something that the council was nearly baked and ready to go. So I would do the public hearing thing, polish up whatever we have at that point, and then bring it to the council and say, we would like you to approve our work.
So if our target is that we have the report done by the 1st of February. We would then, in early February, have a hearing on our recommendations. And then take it to the council. So should we target that last council meeting in February for
Sure.
presentation to the council?
Sure. I mean, assuming we don't have something wildly different, that we would need to change a lot of things during that public hearing, but based on what we've seen already, I think that's probably okay.
All right, facilitate communication between Wausau Policing Task Force, other local governmental units, and the public. I think we've done that with dialogue. We've invited representatives of the county, jail, the Justice Alternatives, the DA's office, and with the public. Anything more in that area? All right. Then it says the committee's work and recommendations should protect public health, safety, and welfare and promote the public interest consistent with the city's municipal code and state and federal laws. I think, again, that's something we would evaluate at the end of the day. It's sort of that final evaluation of the report. Recommend policies for local action. It's proposed by the policing task force. Again, that's in the works. And develop a plan of action for the policing task force recommendations conferring with the Police and Fire Commission. Michael and Will, do you think that as part of that February rollout that we should be sitting down with the Police and Fire Commission at a joint meeting?
I mean, I would invite the rest of the commission to participate. They've been interested in the process. I mean, as it relates to any recommendations within their statutory authorities, I think we should engage them. But if it's outside their statutory authorities or usurping their role in the community, I don't know if that would be important or not. But they would be welcome to be invited. I think they would take you up on that.
So why don't we both keep in mind that we would invite them, and then we will revisit that issue after our discussion at the next meeting, given the roles. Okay. In other duties assigned by mayor and council, I think we've done that.
Want it back? Just kidding.
So people are comfortable that when we looked at the tasks, either have completed them and/or will be engaging in the discussion of what our recommendations are, the citizens' engagement, and we want to revisit item 5 after we receive the report from WIPS. All right. Then we'll move on to item 5, develop recommendations, officer training and wellness, cultural awareness, and mental health services. Officer training and wellness, did that make it in the packet? So today I pulled out, not necessarily because they're great ideas, but because they were involved in somebody's recommendations from either the President's Commission on 21st Century Policing, the Wisconsin Professional Police Association, and/or the Speaker's Task Force, a number of things that could or could not be related to officer wellness. Are there any items that you think we should be looking at from the perspective of officer training and/or wellness? Some items that have been suggested by people throughout this process that I've picked up on and are, for discussion, are bilingual capabilities, in that are people able to speak the language, diversity training, and mental health response to the officers. How, how are we in terms of dealing with the officers' health and wellness and trauma? And then there are the other recommendations, and I'm not necessarily advocating those, I'm just throwing those out as items that have come up at one point or another, and we'll deal with cultural awareness as a separate issue. Any thoughts?
Yes, I would again advocate that the services, whether we call it EAP, whether we call it however we want to define it, I guess, for our officers, by appropriately trained and skilled facilitators, I think is crucial. I think when we look at incidences and whether it's internal, external for the officers, having people that can process with them versus, no offense to EAP staff, but there's a difference. There's situations that they never conceptualized, or, they don't probably think a lot about, I'm going to bed tonight, but I know a guy I arrested just bailed out. And what does that mean, and what's that fear? I think that, for me, is going to be all right, I'm going to advocate for that recommendation pretty strongly.
You want to put that recommendation out on the table tonight?
Yeah, I would put that the recommendation is to invest further in adequately trained mental health and support resources for our officers.
I'll second that.
All right, is there any discussion? Ben, if you'd like to weigh in, or you're just... Katie?
I just want to, so we currently have a pretty good organization we're working with. I just want to understand, we would like more of that, or we would like to continue that? I'm thinking of Polly.
If it's okay, I can talk about that a little bit. I think,
Yes.
the discussion we had, I think last time around EAP services, is that we do have somebody who we work with specific towards law enforcement trauma, doing critical incident stress debriefings and individual counseling sessions with officers. That is not part of our EAP program, and I think that is, that's a need. It's something that we have a need for in terms of an EAP program that has law enforcement specific counselors who have that background training and education in law enforcement trauma response. So if an officer has an incident and they want to seek out our EAP, they can call the 800 number and they can set an appointment, but the likelihood that they will talk with a counselor who has law enforcement understanding of law enforcement and that background and training is low.
Mike?
So that's available in, significant situations or post-event. You had mandatory mental health evaluations or counseling sessions for all your officers. How did that go? And is there something in the middle of that where there's proactive, ongoing resources that you would like to see?
Yeah, so taking those issues separately, one is the annual mental health check-ins that we had officers, we required every sworn staff member to do this year. Those are almost complete. I will get feedback from Holly, who we contracted with to do those in the near term. And I've gotten some feedback from our staff that it was well received and they appreciated the information they received. It's not a counseling session, it's more of an educational session, an opportunity to talk about things that have been going on in their careers, to gauge the level of trauma they've experienced in their careers and the possibility of burnout, those kinds of things. And I'm sorry, what was the second piece of that? Oh, and I think the second piece is, if you're looking at like preventative items, what for mental health, what can we do? I think, Appleton has a really good model. They have a part-time counselor that works out of their office 15 to 20 hours a week. They're there every week. They come to briefings, their doors open so that there can be random drop-ins. There's relationship and rapport building with staff members. They do ride-alongs on a regular basis. Those kinds of things that destigmatize seeking out mental health treatment, but also have the ability at any moment's notice to have somebody that's standing there in the moment of trauma or shortly thereafter. I think that's a really good practice. Is it evidence-based best practice? I'm not sure, but it makes sense to me.
So I did a little survey. I teach graduate classes in criminal justice, and I sent out just a feeler, and I asked, so this is across Wisconsin and as well as the nation. And one of the things that the feedback I got, and this is mainly from command officers, was that the departments that were big enough to support an Appleton model, it wasn't the formal interactions that they saw the benefit from. It was the ride-alongs. It was the stop in, say hi. And so it was having that person that gained the trust of the officers, and then they could just say, hey, can I just, and they would say, yeah, let's go on a ride-along. Because then there was no stigma to it. Oh, the counselor's coming on a ride-along with me. That's fine. You're right. It was a common point. So I can see that being a benefit.
Yeah, and I would imagine once you have that relationship built, staff members, as they recognize their friend, their coworker is going through some bad things as a result of work-related issues, can text that counselor and say, hey, check in on Ben because Ben's going through some bad stuff. I mean, there's a ton of value to that model, I think.
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead, Pat.
Yeah, I'm wondering, so is it correct that if officer is having relatively minor difficulties, he or she might seek out services of one of the, you have several chaplains, don't you?
Yes, we have 8 or 9.
And so that's available, regular EAP is available, and so what we're talking about is making sure that we have somebody competent in case of trauma or some violence or something like that.
Yeah, I think what we're talking about
Easy
is,
stuff handled.
I wouldn't even say that, to be honest. I think that we have some things that are available. Whether or not they're actually accessed and utilized to their highest extent, I think we have a lot of work to do in that regard. So I don't even know that we have the easy stuff taken care of. But I think if we're looking at how do we support our officers and their mental health, we build supports that are easily accessible, that are easy to take advantage of, and that are always around. I think that's how we take care of them as best as we can. That's my opinion.
Yeah, and I think and correct me if I'm wrong, I think what the chief is saying when he says too, law enforcement specific training, he's talking about someone that is a counselor that maybe was a law enforcement officer themselves or only deals with that, so that they're not dealing with counselors who they have to explain each and every time what's going on before they can even get to their issue. Would that be correct?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and I'd be willing to train them too. So, there's been talk at the state level about offering training to mental health counselors about law enforcement. So what does law enforcement need? What do they do? And so that they have some introduction to that. I think of the Appleton model, I'd want somebody who's interested in law enforcement, but, if they're spending 15 hours a week at a police department, they're going to know what law enforcement is within a few months. And so that's what I mean in terms of we can do the training and we can help them understand the profession as long as they understand the psychology and the mental health component of things.
All right, any other discussion on the motion?
Then I think should the motion be revised a little bit to be more specific in terms of what we're actually stating, what we're trying to recommend?
You certainly are welcome to offer that clarification.
Okay.
if you can figure out how to word it. The other option would be was for us to capture it, and then we can look at it in the once it's presented, and see if you want to modify the language. But what I have is invest in further adequately trained mental health support services for officers.
I think that my intent, if I may, was at the 20,000-foot level. On this as a recommendation, I think we need to pursue further. Not necessarily the motion was intended to be the verbatim recommendation, rather that we're making a recommendation surrounding this. And I think part of this is going to be shaped by the data we still get from listening sessions and stuff. I want to be sort of cautious that we're not walking away from here without the law enforcement stuff and things like that, that we need to shape it further.
Perhaps what might be helpful is if we could adopt the concept tonight and look for action items. I think what you're looking for, Will, what I'm sensing is you're looking for some actionable item. So if we could just adopt the concepts, we can then bring them back and we could look at clarifying what action would be associated with that at our, probably our January meetings. Does that make sense?
Exactly, yeah, I just want to make sure that we're clear to, when we eventually bring it to the council, what we're stating. So that's what I'm talking about, yeah, the actionable part on that. Thank you.
So I think we would look for clarification again, reports are useless if they're not actionable. They're historical statements versus future orientated. So I think we'll have to look at how we can make these actionable. Mike?
A different question?
Go ahead.
One of the recommendations in the president's report was on looking at scientifically supported shift lengths. We went to longer shifts several years ago. How's that going? You think that's better or, more detrimental to officer well-being?
I don't know what the studies say. I think it was 2012, we went to 12-hour shifts from 8-hour shifts. So our officers now work 7 out of 14 days, and they work 12 hours, 5 of those days, and 10 hours 2 of those days. I think if you talk to our officers, I think you would mostly find that they don't want to do anything but the 12-hour shift. I think they like the amount of time off that they get as a result of that. With that being said, 12 hours is a long time to work. If you have an emergency call at the end of that 12-hour shift, you might end up working 14 or 16 hours. We have built into our contract a requirement that if you're working 2 days in a row, you have to have 10 hours off in between shifts. So if you do get a late call and you end up working 16 or 18 hours, you don't have to come right back in at the start time. That's built into our contract. So I don't have a good answer for you in terms of wellness. I mean, do they get tired at the end of 12 hours? Yes, they do. But in terms of wellness, they have a lot of time off to spend with family, to do things outside of their work, which is a good thing too. So it's kind of a double-edged sword.
I mean, if that's their preference and it's going well, then, enough said.
Yeah, I mean, when I talk to our union board about shifts, every now and again they'll talk about a 10-hour shift or a different shift or rotation. I'm not really partial to any shift as long as we can manage the overtime budget within whatever schedule it is they want to work. So I've kind of put that in the union's hands and said, if you want to bring a new shift, then bring a new shift and we'll talk about it and what that might look like.
Anecdotally, during the ride-along I was on, I asked about shifts and stuff, and they, the officers that I was talking to, they liked it. For them, I think it's the separation. I think there's a huge thing about saying, I'm off. And, the day I was riding along, it was a couple of them, they were going away for a few days. They were going up north. And it was like they can totally separate. And they'd rather work that 12 for them and get that break than a shorter, more frequent.
Yeah, the shift that we had was a 5 on 2 off, 5 on 3 off. So you rotated through your off days. So some weekends I'd have a Monday, Tuesday off. And then every 3 months or so I'd rotate into weekends off. But now with the 12-hour shift, you have every other weekend is a 3-day weekend. And there's a ton of value in terms of family time and family commitments to having weekend time off.
Let me go back to Mike's original motion to invest. We never took a vote. Can we, any other discussion on that motion? If not, all is in favor of making that recommendation signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carried. Anything else that you saw in there? We're doing the psychological evaluations. Anything else from officer training? No, you don't specifically look for bilingual capabilities at hiring. Have you found that to be an issue?
I'm not sure what you mean by we don't look for, we certainly do ask about that, and.
Do you? Okay.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. There's definitely a benefit to us, to our community, to our department, if we have candidates who are bilingual. I mean, they have to be able to do the job of a police officer, but if they're bilingual, that's excellent.
I guess when it comes to this comment, it's a lot from me, but a lot from people I've heard from, and this is something I'm thinking about citywide. We don't have a lot of people coming into City Hall, or maybe even the police department, probably more there, saying, I speak Spanish and I need help. They come in with their friend and they've waited already. And so that's kind of what I'm thinking of when I think about either bilingual officers or a service. I would love to make the recommendation that we could be more inclusive if we had whatever that is, a service, and it's not just for police, it's for everyone at City Hall and workers here. So I know we've talked about this.
Yeah, the mayor and I talked about this because we had a meeting with ECDC about the refugees coming to Wausau and the language challenges that may present. So we want to be prepared for that as a police department, but then, we talked about whether or not that would be a need citywide, firefighters, paramedics, City Hall employees, that kind of thing. So, yeah, it'd be great to have something that's all-inclusive. We do have a small budget. It's about $2,000 for translation services. So 24/7, 365, in theory, we can pick up the phone, we can get on the line with an interpreter, and that can help us with whatever situation or language we encounter out in the street. But I'm certain that is not going to be sufficient if we have a large number of refugees that don't speak English coming to our community.
And I think one of the things that strikes me is, especially from the Spanish-speaking community, the people I've talked to, they've said that, people don't just come in here and ask about their water bill. They wait for me to get off of work, so that's what I'm doing in my free time. And at our Liberation and Freedom Committee just last week, we heard from Nell Anderson, who said the same thing about the Hmong bilingual student aides, that they were so busy after school helping parents get done what needs to get done. So I guess that's my thought here, is that the recommendation be that we're proactively letting the community know that we have this service for them so that everyone can get what they need when they need it, instead of waiting for their friend or waiting until the last second when they maybe have missed a court date. Whatever that looks like, I don't know.
So the issue is ensuring that we have access to adequate language services or comprehension to basically allow people to come in to access services.
Yes, and I want to be able to say to the community, we have this available for you. Come in whenever you need us, instead of it being desperation that brings somebody asking for those services.
I think the mayor's last point is a really good one, that try to get the word out that these services are available, and so they know, they might want to have a situation where they call ahead to the city clerk's office or something and say, hey, I'm coming in, or my friend is coming in, he or she speaks this language, can you accommodate that on Thursday morning? And go to town. Otherwise, they're going to think, got a big concrete building here. Who in there is going to could possibly help me? And it'd be nice to get the word out that we do want to have that outreach and flexibility.
So how do we frame that point?
So just a point of clarification on this. So do we need to find a service still, or do we need to increase the budget for the service that we're currently using? Is that?
Yes
current
and
service?
yes.
Okay.
The reason I'm saying yes and not just yes is that, we will need more language services, I think, than what our current provider has, specifically that Dari and Pashto language, so.
You heard of language line? Language line?
Is that a suggestion?
Yeah, I guess we could probably talk about that, see if that's a possibility. I do have some suggestions of things I've used
Awesome.
through Judicare and through the court system, in different counties, so.
Thank you.
So again, do we want to adopt a concept and then look at some specific actionable items at a future meeting? So do I have a motion relative to ensuring that we have access to bilingual services?
I'll make that first motion that we have adequate access to increased language services or language services.
I second that.
Any discussion?
I just want to liberally interpret this as you mean, we're talking about the policing task force and the police, but when I present this, I will say, we all want this, so.
You can expand it beyond our scope all you want. How's that for now?
I do a lot of expanding of scope.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, no? That motion carries. Other items? Other items. I think this might be one we might want to look back after we see what the focus groups come in relative to. I know that there was an effort to reach out to some of the targeted populations, and that may shed some light. So we can, until we're done, we can always go back and revisit.
I do think, just because I personally had heard from folks about diversity training, that might be something we specifically look for in the data we've collected from WIPs. I don't know what that looks like yet, but
So I would ask maybe that in light of the fact that we don't have specifics today, that we put that in the parking lot for the next meeting after WIPS does a presentation to see what issues may come up. And then we revisit it at that time. All right, anything else under officer training or wellness? If not, cultural awareness, and that has changed significantly since we started this discussion with the upcoming events. One of the things that jumped out at me, particularly in the listening sessions, is when we were meeting with some of the Klan leaders and the Hmong leaders, and the differences in approach to handling domestic abuse, for instance, where the Klan's, I think, preference was to handle it within the Klan structure, and we look to handle it within the legal system, which we're required to do under the statutes. And it highlighted perhaps a need for better cultural understanding. And one of the things that I think the department does well is a neighbor-to-neighbor program. I wonder if we might not want to expand that to deal with certain different groups. If we could reach out to the Klan leaders and others and have those discussions. I think we want to be careful not to promise we're going to change how we enforce, but they would hopefully have a better understanding of the rationale behind us. And I think given the tragic deaths that have occurred due to domestic abuse situations, we don't want to change the law, but having that understanding of cultural differences goes a long way in getting cooperation. Any thoughts? Katie?
I'm trying not to dominate this conversation, but after some of those meetings, we've had some follow-ups, and I think there is opportunity for us. There's to learn a little bit more. I talked to one man about a religious ceremony that was taking place that was very loud, and people were complaining to the police about it. And, that's an opportunity for us to maybe tread carefully, because one of the things spiritually that happens if you interrupt a ceremony is that it's a problem for people. So I think there's opportunity there, in addition to maybe some of the cultural nuances around how we treat each other. I know we talked about the domestics here. Maybe that's an opportunity for us to mutually influence each other.
Pat?
I wonder if I could ask the chief if he's ever had a request from a Klan leader to have an officer or a representative of the department come and speak to them. I don't know what they have for meetings, what their structure is, or anything like that. But is there any, like with the neighborhood association, that, this group meets Monday at 6:30 and that you're expected to come and have kind of an overview of what's going on regarding policing in the community, and that's done nicely. But has any of the clans ever requested any of that kind of liaison stuff?
No, nothing on a regular, ongoing basis. I've been a number of times to the Hmong American Center and spoken with groups of Klan leaders about varying topics over the years, but there's nothing standing like Mr. Robinson is discussing in terms of the ongoing meetings like you're describing with the neighborhood groups.
Do you see value in that?
I see value in it. I don't know what interest there is in having a regular standing meeting like that, but yeah, I think there's value in that, and we can certainly work towards doing that.
Any-
Oh, I guess I just want to add, I feel like that right now, we're working on building some trust. We've had a couple of meetings, and they're deciding how they, like the Klan leaders, when I talk about this, and, we've had some good discussions. I think that we have opportunity to do more. And I'm not just mean the police, it's also me. People are learning to trust me too.
And I would agree. I think this is going to be where we can create, or I guess police department can create opportunities to build an ongoing relationship, because that is the key, sort of trust with and understanding. And so they understand sort of where the police are coming from and why certain action needs to be taken in certain situations, but also we understand culturally where they're coming from, in terms of differences, in terms of marriage overall, and some of those other differences. And I think with that understanding, then that will lead to, I think, better relationships and trust on that end.
Yeah, and we have done, among specific police, oh my gosh. Sorry, my
Citizens
brain's-
Academy?
Citizens Academy, thank you. Yeah, it's late in the day. We have done Citizens Academy specific for people from the Hmong community who are interested in learning about law enforcement. We've had a number of other events similar to that. Actually, one where we had some use of force scenarios similar to what the task force did last summer, and that kind of thing. So over the years, we've done a number of those things as there's been interest. So if the recommendation is for us to be more consistent in that and have that formalized a bit, I think we can do that.
Any thoughts today? What do you want to?
I have
Sarah?
a question about, do you have Hmong clan leaders, though, come into the police department and give presentations to the law enforcement, to the officers, to let them also know, some of their cultural?
Yeah, we haven't had anything like that from Klan leaders. We have a number of Hmong staff members who have provided training informally and formally over the years. But
Okay.
John? It's okay. I think that would almost be something where you would float an offer with the clan leaders and say, if you want us, we could come 4 times a year to your meetings. If you don't, no hard feelings, but the offers are there.
Okay.
And I, obviously you can't say, when are your meetings, we'll be showing up and, give us 15 minutes. But maybe the gesture, I think, would be a great one.
Why don't we, we'll work on some language to bring it back at the next meeting, because I'm not sure how to frame this right now in a way, and we can talk to Ben. So we'll capture that thought and bring it back. Anything else under cultural awareness?
I guess I want to open it up to the idea that culture isn't just, Hmong or even an Afghan refugee or something. Like one of the things that struck me when we were initially going over the survey data from WIPS was that younger people had a mistrust. So what does it look like to build cultural awareness with younger people or the LGBT community, or what does that look like, or is there something specific we should be looking at? I'm just thinking out loud here, so please feel free to riff.
Yeah, I would agree, and I would say, too, like with the Black community, the talk is a real thing. So I think sort of awareness of that and why that is, in terms of being able to have some understanding of just different viewpoints on that and the history, I think will be helpful.
And I support both of those. I was also thinking when you were talking, when I was a EMT, we had, someone who was autistic come in and talk to us about if we responded, what that would look like. And now as a dad of a child on the spectrum, I think, some of these, the broad sense of culture, there is a lot. And I think you can, when we think about that, how does that play in mental illness and all of that, weighing in for the officers at some point? I mean, there's only so many hours a day of training, but how can we support the police department to provide some of these, even if it's this is what I personally experienced, quick at roll call or wherever, saying, here's a 5-minute, my name is so-and-so and I'm on the spectrum, here's something you might want to think about if you're interacting with me. And I don't know what the answer is, but I think culture, I agree, that culture is bigger than race, ethnicity. I think it's bigger than identity and gender and orientation. But what recommendations can we support for the staff, the training, so it's not here's another 2 hours that really is going to be hard for them in their day-to-day.
So I think we've got a lot of thoughts. So maybe if we could we'll try to see if we can get some language that might embrace that, and then also with the thought that we would lead to actionable items. So we'll put our thinking caps on and see what we can come up with and bring that back. Anything else under cultural? All right, mental health services. One of the discussions that we started to have is what should mental health response look like in the future? We spent time talking about CART. I think Dane County, Madison looks to use EMTs. Do we have any thoughts relative to how we respond? And I know some of that is difficulty because the calls go into 911, they're dispatched, and there isn't always a lot of information to triage to make the decision. So the law enforcement is responding. But in an ideal world, how would we, because that's really a core issue of how do we create the situation where the appropriate people are responding and the appropriately trained people are responding. Any thoughts on that? And Michael, I'd look to you for.
So I do have a question for the chief to answer in a minute out of this, but I mean, whether it's a mental health emergency or a call for police, the first hurdle is the element of safety. I mean, it's the public safety. And so when law enforcement gets there and there's no longer an imminent public safety threat, we should be looking to the mental health system to triage and take over. And the thought I had this morning was, in your report, you had 5115s broken down by facility versus community. And facility was 5115s that occurred with somebody already in a mental health institute versus people that you go out in the community. I think the number was almost 40% of your 5115s were facility-based, where you actually had to go, I'm assuming, to North Central Healthcare to initiate the commitment process. I mean, in those instances, I would gather that, you know, law enforcement gets there and they're just doing a statutory duty. I mean, they are really not, probably 99% of the time, not overruling what the mental health person's saying. It takes them off the street. It maybe escalates the situation if there's not a safety issue. But can you just maybe talk about that, if that's true in the case, and maybe that's something that we look at eliminating, is facility-based 5115 commitments, or creating some way to allow that to happen without law enforcement? And then, you know, maybe is there a better triage out in the community? And sorry, that's really a deep kind of thought process, but.
Sure. I mean, I can share my report, the quarterly report that Michael's referring to. 40% seems high. I guess I don't recall the number, but that does seem high to me. But regardless of the number, I think the struggle that I have in the conversation about decoupling law enforcement from the mental health crisis response is that statutory obligation. A law enforcement officer is required to sign in the line to commit somebody to a mental health commitment. So it's really hard to decouple a police officer from that response because they're the statutory person that signs that emergency detention form to commit somebody. And that's why when we respond to North Central Healthcare, that's what they're asking for, simply is a signature on the form. We do more than that. We still have to get the information. We have to make sure there's justification for the emergency detention before we sign the form. But I'm not sure how to decouple law enforcement from that without a change to the statutes.
Yeah, I think Jefferson County does something unique in that regard. You know, the reality is that the detention is going to have a 72-hour window where the court system is going to have to determine whether it's legally permissible or not. So I don't know what the answer is, but I would suggest that we look at that because it does take our Wausau police officers off the street. It does enter them into a situation that, you know, perhaps you don't need to be in most of the time. I'm assuming you do that for all law enforcement agencies as a courtesy because you're closer.
Yeah, typically if they're already at North Central Healthcare voluntarily, yeah, we will handle that commitment, that decision.
So if they're from.
If they're from Attigo,
Yeah.
if they're from Merrill, usually we'll take care of that if they're already housed at North Central Healthcare.
Yeah.
I mean, that response and that interaction, I think, is the one that community members are least concerned about. It's usually in a controlled setting, and there's less, it's less imminent or immediate in terms of our response and that kind of thing because they're already there in the custody and care of professionals. But it is time consuming. There's no two ways about that.
Yeah, so I think, just to maybe end my thoughts for the moment is, this morning when we were interviewing somebody for the promotion, the police department talked about his experience in CART and how it's helped him be, a better officer and a better, parent. I mean, there's a lot of benefits for giving our officers that type of training. But my takeaway from the feedback from some of the things we've heard throughout this process is that while officers appreciate and want to be successful in those situations, they do not want to be the first person and the primary person in those situations. And I think that supports our recommendations relative to social workers, our recommendations towards expanding CART. I think those are the right answers. But fundamentally, law enforcement has a very important role in any kind of situation where, somebody is compelled to call 911, and that is because there is a potential public safety risk. Once that's done, we should find all ways possible for law enforcement not to be in charge of the scene or the situation at that point, once a public safety risk or crime has been eliminated as the reason for the interaction. That's just my opinion. I don't know how you solve it, but I think expanding the mental health and social service recommendations, looking at all situations where law enforcement, are maybe performing a ministerial duty at that point where they're not, required to be there. We can keep attacking those issues. That's just my thought. I don't know if that helps John, but that's how I feel about the situation.
I think it's an issue in search of language, and, for clarity. We can take a stab at it for the next meeting. We have talked about expanding CART. We've talked about the need to have, the social worker presence. So maybe we'll go back and look at some of that discussion in the minutes and then try to bring something in. Maybe, Ben, we can talk through this and try to bring something in at the next meeting. Katie?
I just want to make sure that we emphasize that point that you just made about the social worker, because that's one of those really important things that keeps coming up. Somebody that maybe works in the police department but is able to do the regular follow-up, much in the same way we've had Officer Lemoran doing with our homeless population. I think there are many, many opportunities to have somebody be in that position that's maybe not specifically an officer, but we can push. I just want to make sure that that is part of this. Thank you.
Any other thoughts on this? But we'll go back and look, and if you have some thoughts, we certainly welcome those. All right. We're going to move on. Review outline of the task force report. We not only have an outline, we have a little bit more. So the mayor took an initial stab. We've been talking back and forth and sharing notes, and what we have is a very broad draft of how we might look at presenting the information. Do you have that? Can you share that? Fresh as of 6:25 tonight.
Oh, that's me.
She's stealing control to get the screen.
Okay, I have stolen control, I believe. I'm not sure. If I steal it back.
You'll have to write the report.
Yeah, okay, I'll just go with here. Okay, so do you want me to just kind of breeze through
Sure.
what we've decided on? All right,
Well, what we're proposing.
yeah. What we're proposing, you are the policy body here. I do want you to know that I'm a visual person, which is why this outline looks the way it does. Okay, beginning here. We can work on this. This is since you've seen it. I want to make sure that why are we even doing this? Obviously, we came together because we wanted to respond, but we didn't want to react, and we also want to continue on our police department's goal of being excellent. So that's why we're here. A little bit of a background. We wanted to make sure that we kind of talked about what brought us here again. You might recall, I actually went back and the Police and Fire Commission president at the time actually asked that we look into this and make sure that we're doing things the right way. We created the task force and then we started meeting, but we can't lose sight of the fact that we had the largest political demonstration of anybody's lifetime last year. This you'll recognize, it's the task force duties and responsibilities as outlined by our authorizing resolution. So I'm not going to spend too much time, but there it is. There you all are with the goals and I hope you don't mind that I stole your professional photos from wherever I could find them. You look great. Okay.
That's the one you found.
Yeah, I went for the LinkedIn style photos and not your, Snapchat photos, so.
If
I want to see TikTok. It's just,
Well, we can do that for you, man. So this was more about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and then what we're missing. So this is more about like the process of what we've done. So, we've met a lot. It was actually kind of interesting to lay out everything we met on and the topic that we talked about. We covered a lot of ground, so good work, everyone. And you got a couple more months of this. Data gathering and analysis, wanted to make sure that we talked about what we did science-wise. We had listening sessions, community survey, focus groups, and then that data capture and analysis. And we, through all this, our friends at the Wisconsin Institute for Public Policy and Service have been by our side. Just kind of an outline of some of the listening sessions. We want to make sure that people recognize where we were, what we were doing. There you all are again. We had the survey. We wanted to make sure, I'm still gathering some of my data, so if you see X's in places, that's just me reminding myself I need to find that. Findings. We have a lot of findings that we want to cover. I didn't put any of them in here because at this point it was 6:15 and I needed to get out here. So,
if I could stop you
Yeah,
there.
why don't you
I
talk?
think some of the things we talked about in the findings is that we wanted to, I think, stress the fact that we were impressed with the quality and the character of the department, their hiring practices, their training, picking up on what Michael had said earlier, the fact that they're a leader in instituting many of the policies, whether it's body cameras or tracking of incidents and other things. So I think those are some of the things we want to put into the findings that we had talked about. And then we'll look at some of the data that was generated through the WIPS report and other things. Are there specific findings that you think we should be addressing in this report? Or do you want to reserve your right?
I'd have to be a little bit more reflective about that. I think if we get to a point where, we were asked for maybe some takeaways as a committee member, I think that might be helpful. I don't know. There's been a lot we've covered. And
So could we ask that for each of you in that context, and I think, Michael, you raised a good point, is that for the next meeting, time permitting, that we ask each of you to identify what your takeaways are from the process to date?
yeah, I think I'm agreeing for you. I'm sorry. I would love it if you told me your insights.
So we'll
Yeah.
put that out, okay?
And if you feel like emailing them to me, I would gather them too. Otherwise, we can talk about it. Okay. Issues. We came across some kind of main themes. So these are just kind of the three here that John and I identified together. But if there are more, we should definitely put them in here. Mental health services, obviously a big one. Officer wellness, and then cultural competency. So maybe this is another opportunity for if there are other.
when you say issues, are those really priorities versus problems? When I see issues, I think that's problems.
What do you think? This was a Robinson
I think what
term.
we're trying to do is identify these as concerns that were raised, issues, concerns.
Challenges, I mean,
Yeah.
would that be a better?
I think we will use the recommendations section to get into, maybe save that thought and see if we address it later, Michael.
Okay, so obviously we have blankness here, but you had a really good conversation, so I will be updating this with what I believe that you have raised. Recommendations. So we talked a lot about the fact that we have recommendations that are going to come out of this that are for City of Wausau that we can control, that we want to control, that we want to say, hey, this is how we want to approach situations like this. But obviously, the justice system is a system, so there are other agencies. We're going to include in here recommendations that we think other agencies might find helpful. You know, I'm willing to even give some recommendations to the state. We have some issues, we have some recommendations that we think would be for further study. Like maybe we have an idea that it's something that would be worth our while, but we definitely don't have what we need in order to articulate a fully formed recommendation. And then this is one, you know, that keeps coming up, and I don't really know how to posit it, but recommendations for the public. How do we behave with each other? How do we interact? How do we make sure that we're keeping each other kind of safe and we can predict behavior? Maybe you want to expound.
I think we were struggling with that when we talked about it. It was sort of the public expectation. I think the public will expect that they be treated fairly and respectfully, and we would have an expectation that the public treat law enforcement fairly and with respect. So I think it's a two-edged. So we sort of heard that in the survey, and we would look for some areas, and I'm not sure if it's in the recommendation or the findings section, but that's yet to be determined. Any thoughts on that type of an approach? We've talked about, you know, we have all these expectations of law enforcement. In what, you know, a couple of our meetings, we talked about what are the expectations of the public relative to law enforcement. And we did survey that question. Any thoughts? Is that worthwhile?
I think so. I mean, I think you got to be willing to also, you know, in this process, it's a, you know, two-way street in terms of, you know, we want, you know, this from our officers, we want them to behave in a certain way. But, you know, they're people, they're human, and they should be treated a certain way as well. Like, you know, I think when the officer said, you know, sometimes you get a little bit off of what you give, right? So that officer might be more likely to let you off with a warning, but if you're being a real jerk, you know, maybe not. I think it's fair to ask the public, you know, in terms of if they have questions, you know, about policies that, you know, that they, you know, we're providing that they do, you know, make those, you know, do some, you know, research looking. I think it's fair to ask the public that if they have complaints about the police officers, instead of, that they, you know, follow a process, that they go and actually, you know, make the complaints as they should, and not just, you know, openly bash the police. I think a level of respect, you know, that we should be asking of each other in terms of moving forward, in terms of building those relationships. So I think it's fair to have a public section and state some of those things as well.
Yeah, I agree. I was waiting for somebody else to jump in on that one. I mean, I think several meetings ago, I came up with a story and a corollary about why this is important. It's like, where do you get taught how to interact with law enforcement? I mean, you just don't, unless you're in a bad situation or have that in your life. I think it's an important thing to speak to the community about how to interact with law enforcement and what to expect. I think it's a great message.
I think, too, one of the things that I came away with were, you know, when we're talking about being culturally different, there are things that people are told about how to interact with police that I never grew up with. So, like, recognizing that as well, maybe we can agree on some norms.
So let me just ask some general questions. Are you comfortable with this type of an approach to the report? It's not the narrative and bogging you down into a lot of detail which never gets read. But we would then put a lot of the information in the appendixes, like links to all the minutes and the packets and some of the information. We would link in all three, the Wisconsin Professional Police Association's Blueprint for Change, the Speaker's Task Force on Racism's recommendations, and the recommendations from 21st Century Policing those would all be appendixes, and we can discuss them by reference in the presentation that these were things that we considered. But are you comfortable with this as an approach?
I think this is really crucial to approach it this way, in that it makes it accessible. That people are not going to look at page one and be like, I'm done. It's another report that I'm not going to, I think that it's engaging, it's going to highlight the things, and then, it's the advantage of the appendix. The person who's like, wait a second, where did they go, where is this from? Because some people are going to say, this is enough information for me. And the key to me in this type of thing is the more people who will actually get at least the executive summary of it down and internalized, the better.
Unless we get it to 144 characters, that would probably be the only better.
I mean, you're asking for
Twitter.
a social media toolkit, and
Yeah.
that is my jam. I am here for it, yes.
Actually, Michael has in his notes, he's going to do a TikTok to it. just so
Okay.
you know.
Yeah. Well, yeah, on that note, I mean, you do have a video person within the department. I mean, if you could spin this into a couple-minute video with summary and link it to the PowerPoint or something like that, that might even be cool, too. I mean, I just ask him, hey, how can you make this more interactive in short, condensed bullet points, and people would love it.
He's a magical unicorn, he can do that.
We can look at that. We want to make sure we capture the breadth. We want to make sure that at the end of the day, they understand that we went through a very deliberate process and a lengthy process. And I think the timelines and the number of meetings that we've had, I think, demonstrates that, the public engagement process and demonstrates that. But we'd ask that you take a look at it with a critical eye, and we'll share something maybe next week, another version. But that's where we
I'm
are.
excited to spend my Thanksgiving working on this.
Well, thank you.
I know
We
you
give
are,
thanks-
too.
We give thanks to you for doing that. Yes, Pilgrim, or whatever. Sarah, Kaylee, any thoughts? So we'll just keep that thought, and again, we'll load down the data in the appendixes, and we'll do a lot of that with links to the various reports. We just have to make sure that those links are supportable over a period of time.
I did send this all out to you, and so if something strikes you, please email me or however you'd like to get in contact. John likes to pop by the office, so.
I think I like that it's very visual. I think as long as we are plain speaking and also concise where we can be, I think that's for the better. Because we want it, like you said, accessible, easy for the, average person to just look at it, read through, get to what they want to get to in terms of understanding and looking at it and be able to move on. If it's overly cumbersome, like they said, then people probably won't read it. We want people to engage and be able to read it and access it.
So we broke things down into, again, 4 different areas. The recommendations that we're going to make to the Police and Fire Commission and the City Council per our request, those that would be for other governmental entities, and it may be North Central Healthcare, it may be Marathon County, it may be the state legislature. Topics needing further investigation or additional clarity. We're not going to have the answers to everything, and then finally that issue of the public expectations. So those are the categories that we thought we'd try to frame things in. Are you comfortable with that approach? Good. That is our agenda. So we've set the meeting dates. So December 16th, January 10th, and January 31st, and then we will get into that presentation to the community and outreach, and we'll go from there. So any questions? It's the 10th and the 31st. And could you send out, save the dates to the group tomorrow? So we can get it on the calendars if they haven't already? Thank you. Any other questions, comments, or motions? Pat
I would
moved,
move to adjourn.
I second.
seconded by Mike. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone, and
Happy Thanksgiving.
we're very thankful for your service to this task force.